génération aussi. Thank you very much, and Happy New Year, everyone. Conservatives add our voices to all Canadians in offering our condolences to the loved ones and family of Constable Greg Poilievre. He was a hero. He put his life on the line, ultimately gave his life for the freedom and the safety of everyone else. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our police officers who risk their lives to protect the Canadian people. And we stand on their side in combating crime to keep our communities safe. The details of the constable's murder are deeply troubling. Of course, this is the 5th police officer murdered since September, and it is part of a 32% increase in violent crime that has happened over the last 7 years, a 92% increase in gang-related murders. In this particular case, the accused was out on bail after having been allegedly committed similar violent offenses, including offenses with firearms and offenses against police officers. He, according to media reports, has previous convictions that are similarly violent. I regularly meet police officers across Canada who tell me that they often have to rearrest the same person in the same day, arresting a violent criminal in the morning and then again in the afternoon after they have been released on bail. These easy catch and release bail policies are found in Justin Trudeau's bill C-75, a bill that makes it much easier to get bail, even in cases of repeat violent offenders and even in cases where the allegations against the newly arrested offender are serious and dangerous to the public. So Conservatives are calling on the Trudeau government to reverse its catch and release bail policy, to allow for prisoners who have been arrested after a long rap sheet of previous offenses for violent crimes, and we believe that they should stay in jail until their trial is complete and until it can be assured that, and if convicted, that they should stay behind bars until such time as it can be assured to all of us that they are no longer a danger to the public. The Trudeau policy on crime has given us a 32% increase in violent crime, 92% increase in gang-related crime. And what has he done? Well, the Prime Minister, in response to all of that, has decided to fearmonger against hunters, against rural Canadians, by pledging to ban hunting rifles. There is exactly zero evidence that banning hunting rifles will combat any of these crimes. What we need to do instead is keep the small number of repeat, habitual, violent offenders behind bars, and when they are newly arrested, deny them bail until such time as their trials are completed in cases where the accused has a long track record of previous violent convictions. Conservatives believe that every Canadian has the right to be safe, that our police officers need all the support they can get in order to provide that safety. We believe that everybody deserves to live in a safe community and that they deserve to enjoy the security of the person that is guaranteed by our Constitution. We're not talking about minor offenders who make a small mistake in their youth. We're talking about the repeat violent offenders that are taking the lives of our people, that are engaging in repeat carjackings, stranger attacks, and in the worst cases, killing of police officers, cases that have become all too common over the last several years. So Conservatives are going to demand the government reverse course, protect our streets, make our Canadian people safe, and that is what we will achieve when we are in government. I'm happy also to receive your questions today on the chaos at our airports and on our airlines as Canadians once again are faced with horrific delays, their vacations ruined, and sometimes losing money and time as a result. We think that Canada deserves better, and I'm happy to take your questions on that and any other issue. Thank you very much, and I now open the floor.
We'll now start the question period. As usual, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de questions. Comme d'habitude, une question suivie. We've been advised that will be time for 5 questions today. We'll start questions in the room, and if time allows, we'll go to Zoom.
Stephen Hoff from the CBC. The Competition Tribunal has ruled that the Rogers-Shaw merger should be allowed to proceed. Do you think allowing this merger is a win for Canadian consumers?
Well, I have very serious concerns about more consolidation. We need more competition in our telecom sector. We don't have enough competition. We saw that with the Rogers shutdown that occurred, I think 7 months ago now. We need, Canadians need to have more choices. When the previous Conservative government was in place, we put in place a policy that required there be 4 competitors in every single marketplace, which proved to reduce prices and increase service. We're going to be looking very carefully at the tribunal's ruling before pronouncing our final position on this. But our purpose in all telecom policy is more competition and choice so that we can have lower prices and better service for our consumers.
Okay, and the government has announced a delay while it works to make changes to the law around medically assisted dying to allow those with mental illness access to the program. Do you think medically assisted dying should be accessible to Canadians who suffer solely from mental diseases?
No, Conservatives do not believe that medical assistance in dying is a solution for mental illness. Conservatives believe that we should provide mental health care to people to improve their quality of life, help heal the psychological wounds that are afflicting them, rather than giving up. And we're very worried about the slippery slope that we see. We see now cases where, certain groups are advocating that small infants be given medical assistance in dying. Obviously, they could not consent to that. We see our Veterans Department telling our heroes that instead of getting the services that they deserve, they should consider ending their own lives. We have the CEO of the Mississauga Food Bank saying that she has people coming into her facility asking not for food, but for help ending their lives, not because they're sick, but because they can't afford to eat. And I believe that we've gone down a slippery slope, and this has been extended far beyond its original purpose. My belief is that we should try to give people lives that they believe are worth living, rather than telling them to give up on life altogether. Life is a precious thing, and government should work with people to give them a life worth living rather than telling them to give up. Thank you.
Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. Good morning, Mr. Poilievre.
Good morning.
So the United States has recently put in an order that would require COVID test results for those traveling from China. Would you want to see Canada follow suit? Where would you stand on something like that?
Well, Conservatives are following this very carefully, and we know that the case numbers in China have exploded over the last several weeks. We haven't yet decided whether we're going to call for the government to impose a mandatory test or vaccination at the border for incoming Chinese flights from China. But we will watch it very carefully, and we'll base our position on science and numbers. As you recall, 2 years ago, we originally said the border needed to be closed to China after COVID began. The government refused to do so for, I think, over 60 days. We were listening to the data at that time, and we're listening to it now. But at this point in time, we're not making a public statement for or against mandatory testing at our ports of entry from China. We will keep you posted on our position, though.
During your leadership campaign, you advocated for replacing the governor of the Bank of Canada. Is that still your position? And if so, who would you like to see leading up the Bank of Canada?
So I believe that, let me just recap why I took that position. The governor of the Bank of Canada printed $400 billion, he along with his predecessor, even while inflation was rising. He continued these policies while inflation was reaching or exceeding its 2% target. During that time, we saw the single biggest increase in housing prices in modern memory, 50% increase in average house prices across the country. We also saw Canadians take on massive new debts in order to afford those houses. He then told Canadians that interest rates would remain low for long. They had no worry that rates would ever rise. And so a lot of Canadians took very large variable rate loans in order to take advantage of that promise. And now that promise has been broken as rates are rising faster than at any time in modern memory. You know, if a waitress doesn't do her job, well, she gets replaced. The same is true of a barber or a trucker or any other Canadian. I believe that that is the same rule for the governor of the Bank of Canada. He will be replaced with someone who has experience in the central banking system that will have as his singular objective, or his or her singular objective, to keep inflation at the 2% target while protecting the financial stability. And I think that is a reasonable thing to request. We're suffering very serious consequences as a result of Justin Trudeau's overspending. I will have a bank governor who is independent from me. The problem is that this bank governor was not independent from Justin Trudeau. He publicly endorsed Trudeau's spending policies, which is not the role of the governor of the Bank of Canada. He's supposed to be in charge of monetary policy and not fiscal policy. And he printed the money to fund those deficits. And he did so in an inflationary environment. That is why I believe he needs to be replaced with a governor that will keep inflation at 2% while preserving financial stability.
Bonjour Monsieur Trudeau, Inès Lombardo de Franco Press. J'ai une question sur le comité des langues officielles. Les membres du Parti conservateur ont fait un filibuster énorme et plus l'étude en comité de C13 qui modifie la loi sur les langues officielles traîne, plus les communautés francophones en situation minoritaire, que vous connaissez bien, il me semble, vont en pâtir. Donc, c'est quoi la stratégie pour le Parti conservateur en matière de langues officielles?
Mais la stratégie du Parti conservateur, c'est de protéger les langues officielles du Canada, y compris pour les communautés en situation minoritaire, et d'aider le Québec à renforcer sa statut comme juridiction française. Où le français est la langue commune des gens. Donc, nous avons eu plusieurs préoccupations avec la loi. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous avons eu ce débat au comité. Mais nous allons protéger les deux langues officielles et nous allons protéger la langue française au Québec en partenariat avec le gouvernement du Québec. Merci.
Go. Okay. Well, I was going to take the follow-up, so sorry. Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press, sir. Your predecessor, Aaron O'Toole, has written a blog basically saying he would like to see fewer F. Trudeau flags. He says they are a symptom of a larger problem in which rage is being normalized, which in turn is hurting our democracy. I'd like your thoughts on those flags and Mr. O'Toole's concerns that, again, rage is being normalized and hurting democracy.
Well, I don't like the flags, and I don't like rage, but I think we have to ask ourselves, why are people so angry? Like, why are people so angry? And the answer is that they're hurting. You know, it's easy for you know, the political establishment to say, stop all your complaining. But when you're one of the 1.5 million people that went to a food bank in the month of March, it's not so easy. If you're one of the people that went to the Mississauga food bank and asked for help with medical assistance in dying, not because you're sick, but because you can't afford to live, it's not so easy. If you're one of the 38-year-olds living in your parents' basement because it now takes more of a monthly paycheck to own a house than at any time in recorded history, it's not so easy to be happy with the way things are going. If you're one of the people who was overprescribed opioids and is now addicted to drugs as a result, it's not so easy to be happy with the way things are going. I have never seen so much hurt and so much pain and suffering in our population in my nearly 2 decades in politics. So yes, of course, we should tell people to be more civil and to reject offensive signs, flags, and language. But we should also ask ourselves, why are people hurting so badly? And we as leaders, you know, the other day, Justin Trudeau was at a big party, 2,000 wealthy liberal lobbyists in the nation's capital, saying that we should stop all the complaining. Well, everybody in that room has nothing to complain about. They're doing very well. It's been an all-you-can-eat buffet for the lobbyists and the insiders in Ottawa. But for the average person who's struggling to make their mortgage payments that have gone up by $800 or $900 a month, that they're living in a different world. So sure, let's tell people to be more civil, but let's, as political leaders, let's actually try to solve the problems that have upset and angered and hurt people so badly. It is our job to turn that hurt into hope, to transform it into something better. You know, my parents taught me that in Canada, it didn't matter where I came from, but where I was going. Didn't matter who I knew, but what I could do. That's the country I want my kids to inherit. So let's make this a place where people feel like their hard work pays off, where they're respected, where their leaders don't talk down to them and point fingers at them, but rather lift them up, where we have a prime minister that actually brings people together and gives them the hope that tomorrow can be better than today. I think that is the real problem that we need to solve, and it's the one I will solve as prime minister. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. Paul Wells of No Fixed Address. I want to essentially do a follow-up on central bank governors. The last time a prime minister declined to renew the mandate of a central bank governor, it was John Crow, who had been running, it was a Liberal who declined to renew John Crow's mandate. He'd been running a high interest rate policy to fight inflation. Was that a good policy, and would you be in the market for someone who had the same philosophy as John Crow?
So you're asking me if John Crow's interest rate policy was the right one. I don't know if it was the right one or not. But I do know that it was the same problem that got the country in the mistake. And we got into the same mess then that we're in now for the exact same reasons. So we had a Trudeau as a prime minister who ran monstrous deficits, dramatically increased the money supply to pay for it. That delivered 12% year-over-year inflation. And then the central bank had to raise interest rates. I think mortgage rates reached nearly 20% as a result. You can debate the interest rate policies later on, but the real problem happens when you create all the cash and run all the inflationary deficits that cause the inflation in the first place. And that's what we have to reverse. You know, here in Canada, we had a 20% increase in the money supply in 2 years. That's the biggest single increase in money supply, M2 money supply, since the last Trudeau. And what are we doing now? Well, Trudeau 2 is running consistent deficits that now even his central bank governor says are inflationary in nature. So the right policy, and the one that I would implement, is to bring the deficits down and in the process bring inflation down. And right now, the cost of government is increasing the cost of living. The more they spend, the more things cost. We have to cap government spending and cut government waste in order to bring down the inflation so that the higher interest rates are no longer necessary. That's the policy that I control. Monetary policy, it will be up to the independent central bank governor. You'll notice that I actually haven't criticized Mr. Macklem for monetary policy. I've criticized him for fiscal policy because I believe when he was printing money specifically to buy government bonds, he was engaging in fiscal policy, and that is not his job. I want a central bank governor that does monetary policy alone and leaves the fiscal policy to the elected officials who are accountable to the electorate.
Okay, on a previous question about the high rates of COVID in China, you said you would listen to the science on questions of mandatory testing, vaccine requirements at the border. In any future contagion of any sort, would you consider scientific advice on whether to impose testing requirements and vaccine requirements within Canada, or would those mandates only ever apply to non-citizens?
So I oppose the mandatory vaccination policy of the federal government because I believe that there was a scientifically supported way to prevent the spread of COVID, and that was through giving people the option to be tested regularly. And based on the data that I've seen, if people are tested negative in a given day, they're not zero risk to transmit, but they're significantly lower risk. And that would have been a reasonable way to allow people the freedom and the personal autonomy over their bodies to decide what they do with the vaccine. And that's the policy that I took in the COVID crisis. It's the policy that I think is the right one. And you're asking me to comment on what I would do on if there was some new pandemic that we haven't heard of. I can't comment on that because I haven't seen that pandemic. We would be inventing a virus, and I'm not in the business of, I don't have a laboratory in which to do that, and I don't want to. So I can't answer a question about a hypothetical in that nature, but I do stand by the position that I took to give people the freedom of choice on vaccines here in Canada, and I stand by it. Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Poilievre. FIREY with Global News. On the question of bail reform, how do you respond to criticism that bringing in stricter bail conditions will inevitably penalize poorer Canadians?
Well, first of all, I think that we should target tougher bail conditions at the most violent repeat offenders. Bail is meant to be for people who are of a very low risk of reoffending. And it should be there for that purpose. Someone has been charged and not convicted of a minor offense, they don't have a long track record of recidivism, then they should have the chance to apply for and in some cases receive bail. But for cases where you have someone with a dozen previous convictions of violence who's then arrested again, it's reasonable to assume that they will reoffend if they're released quickly. And in those cases, I think we should keep them behind bars until their allegations can be heard in court. As for the impact on poor and minority communities, those communities are disproportionately the victims of crime. And when a violent offender goes back onto the streets after having committed multiple offenses, is likely to be the poorest and most vulnerable that will be the victims of his predation. So I think that protecting the vulnerable is an argument against Justin Trudeau's catch and release bail policies. Instead, we should protect the vulnerable by keeping the most violent reoffenders behind bars until such time as they can be made rehabilitated and safely released.
And then on the question of the chaos at Canadian airports, what are some solutions? I mean, should the government be looking at stricter penalties for airlines that overbook or more regulations? How can we stop this sort of backlog that we saw in the summer and then again over the holidays?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, let's acknowledge this is a federal problem. Our airports are federally regulated, and their boards are in part federally appointed. They are federally mandated, and they operate on federal land. Our airlines are federally regulated. This is a federal problem. It is the job of Justin Trudeau to bring back stability and service to our airline sector. Now, remember, he's blaming the snow right now, but there was no snow in the summer, and there was chaos at our airports at that time. So what was the excuse then? Well, he claimed that it was COVID. Well, I mean, it seems like Justin Trudeau is better at coming up with excuses than he is at coming up with solutions. The solution, of course, is to have a Canadian transportation agency that holds airlines accountable for breaking their word to the people. That's what the agency is there for. It is a federal agency. And it is the machinery of government that is the responsibility of the Prime Minister to make that agency work. How is the agency working right now? 30,000 Canadians are waiting to have their complaints heard. they're waiting 18 months. So your entire vacation gets ruined. You're sleeping on a cold concrete floor at a airport somewhere. And what does Justin Trudeau offer you? The chance to file a complaint and wait 18 months to potentially get compensated. Not good enough. First of all, we're calling on the government to clear the backlog of complaints at the Transportation Agency so that the airlines can be held accountable for their miserable service. Two, we want tougher and clearer rules to bring about compensation for those whose vacations have been ruined. And three, we need to understand why both our airlines, but more importantly, our airports, are such a complete mess. Canada used to have the best functioning airports in the world. Yet this summer, one organization rated Toronto as having the worst service when it came to planes running on time. The worst. Dead last on planet Earth. This is Justin Trudeau's responsibility. This is a federal airport. These are federally regulated airlines. We must clear the backlog on the complaints, hold the airlines responsible, and get better services for our people. It's become, unfortunately, a common story in Justin Trudeau's Canada. Nothing seems to work. I was at the Ottawa airport the other day. It's an incredible story. Mustafa walks up to me from Calgary. I say, "What are you doing in Ottawa, Mustafa?" He says, "I'm here to get my passport." Well, I said, "You can get a passport in Calgary." He says, "Well, I thought so too, but I applied 10 months ago, and it became desperate because I have a wedding in Cuba for myself, and I need to get my passport to get there." And I said, "Well, when's your wedding?" "Yesterday." I said, "Well, where's your wife?" "In Cuba with my 20 best friends and family members." So they're all down there in Cuba waiting for him to come down and get married. He can't get a passport. He applied 10 months earlier. This is how everything operates with Justin Trudeau. You got 2.1 million people waiting for their immigration application. You've got people still waiting 10 months for a passport. You've got airports that are in total chaos. You can't get children's medicine at local drugstores. Our hospitals are overflowing with patient requests. You know, our veterans are told they should consider medical assistance in dying. Nothing is working. And that's because the Prime Minister isn't working. He's not working for our Canadians. We need a Prime Minister who will work for our country, get things done, deliver for Canadians. We deserve it. We're the best country in the world. It's time the Prime Minister acted like it. Thank you very much. Great to see you, and Happy New Year.